fast crisis, slow resilience.
Mm.
If you had to boil down the human experience of stress to just 4 words, those might be the ones.
They really might be.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are not just talking about organs. We are talking about a survival strategy that has kept our species alive for, well, millennia. We're looking at the adrenal glands.
It's great to be here, and you're absolutely right to frame it as a strategy, because when we look at the physiology of the adrenal gland, and we're drawing from Ganong's review of medical physiology and the classic Guyton and Hall textbook of medical physiology, we aren't just looking at a lump of tissue.
No.
We're looking at a timeline.
A timeline. Explain that.
Well, one part of this organ handles the split-second terror, the lion in the grass.
The immediate threat.
The immediate threat. The other part handles the long winter, the famine, the weeks of recovery after a serious injury. It's a single anatomical structure that houses 2 completely different concepts of time.
And that is the core tension we're diving into today.
Mm-hmm.
The adrenal medulla versus the adrenal cortex, the sprinter versus the marathon runner.
Precisely. And before we get lost in all the biochemistry, I think it's really helpful to set the stage visually. If you were to look into the retroperitoneum, that space behind your abdominal cavity, you'd see the kidneys.
Right.
And sitting right on top of the superior poles of those kidneys, like little triangular hats, are the adrenal glands.
Quiet sentinels, I think I read in one of the texts.
Yes, but deceptively quiet. They weigh maybe 4 grams each. I mean, they're tiny.
Incredibly small for what they do.
And yet, if you were to surgically remove them, specifically the outer shell, the cortex, and you didn't have hormone replacement, you'd be dead in a week. Maybe 2.
That sets the stakes pretty high. Now, we are using the chapters on adrenal physiology from Ganong and Guyton as our map today. And the first thing that really struck me is that the adrenal gland is a paradox. It's called a gland, singular.
Right.
But embryologically, functionally, it's 2 totally different organs that are just wrapped in one capsule.
That is the first mental leap you, the listener, really need to take to understand this. Don't think of it as one thing. It's a duplex. It's a condo. You have the inner core, the adrenal medulla, which is actually nervous tissue. And then you have the outer shell, the adrenal cortex, which is a true endocrine gland.
And they come from different places originally.
Completely different embryological neighborhoods. The cortex comes from mesoderm. The medulla, though, it comes from the neural crest. It's effectively brain tissue that migrated down during development and set up shop on top of the kidney.
Which explains, I guess, why they behave so differently. So here's our roadmap for this deep dive. We're going to start with the fast system, the medulla, and the chemistry of that whole fight-or-flight response.
The sprint.
The sprint. Then we're going to shift gears to the slow system, the cortex. We'll break down its 3 zones: salt, sugar, and sex.
The classic GFR layers. It's a great mnemonic.
We will definitely get into that. We'll talk about how these hormones are made, how they save your life, and importantly, how these 2 systems talk to each other. Because, as it turns out, the medulla and the cortex aren't just roommates.
No, they're coworkers. Deeply integrated coworkers.
And finally, we have to talk about what happens when regulation fails. The pathology, Addison's, Cushing's, all the things that go wrong when this delicate balance tips.
The clinical side of things, yeah.
Right. But let's start with speed, the adrenal medulla. Ganong calls this a modified sympathetic ganglion. Can we unpack that? Because when I think of a ganglion, I think of a relay station for wires. I don't think of a gland squirting hormones into the blood.
It's a fascinating evolutionary hack. It really is. To understand it, you have to think about how the sympathetic nervous system, your fight-or-flight system, normally works.
Okay.
It's usually a 2-step process, a 2-neuron chain. You have a nerve coming from the spinal cord called the preganglionic neuron. It goes to a ganglion, which is just a cluster of nerve cell bodies.
Little junction box?
A junction box, exactly. And there, it hands the signal off to a second nerve, the postganglionic neuron.
Like a baton pass in a relay race.
That's the perfect analogy. And that second runner, the postganglionic nerve, has a very long axon, a long wire that reaches all the way to the target organ, say the heart or the gut. And it releases its chemical norepinephrine directly onto that tissue.
So it's targeted. Direct delivery.
Very direct, point to point.
Yeah.
Now, look at the adrenal medulla. It gets that first nerve. The preganglionic fiber runs all the way from the spinal cord from about T1 to L2. But there is no second nerve.
The baton gets passed to nobody.
The baton gets passed to the cells of the medulla themselves. These cells are the postganglionic neurons. But somewhere in our evolution, they lost their axons. They don't have wires anymore. They became secretory cells.
So instead of delivering the message to one specific place, they just dump the chemical message into the bloodstream for everyone to hear.
Exactly. They turn a specific targeted neural signal into a systemic, global hormonal broadcast. Instead of whispering to the heart, beat faster, they grab a megaphone and scream it to the entire body via the circulation.
And that screen is the release of catecholamines.
Right. Epinephrine, which most of us know as adrenaline, and norepinephrine.
Now, I noticed a detail in gang that I hadn't really appreciated before. There's a huge species difference here.
There is, and it's quite telling. If you look at a cat or a whale or a lot of other mammals, their adrenal medulla secretes mostly norepinephrine. It's very similar to just a normal nerve ending.
Yeah.
But in humans and also in dogs, the output is different. We secrete about 80% epinephrine and only about 20% norepinephrine.
So why the upgrade? I mean, what does epinephrine do that norepinephrine doesn't? Why did we evolve to prioritize the epi side of that equation?
It all comes down to the receptors. This is a recurring theme in physiology, right? The chemical itself doesn't matter as much as the lock it fits into.
A receptor it hits.
Exactly. Norepinephrine is a bit of a specialist. It mainly targets alpha receptors.
And alpha receptors, just as a quick refresher, do what?
They squeeze. Primarily, they cause vasoconstriction. They clamp down on blood vessels to raise your blood pressure. And that's great. It's great if you're bleeding out or in shock, but it's a bit of a one-trick pony.
Okay, so it's limited. And epinephrine?
Epinephrine is a generalist, a jack of all trades. It hits the alpha receptors, sure. It helps with blood pressure, but it also hits beta receptors with really high affinity, and the beta receptors are the game changer.
How so?
Beta 1 receptors are on the heart. Hit them, and you increase the rate and the force of contraction. You get a much more powerful heartbeat. Beta 2 receptors are in the lungs, in the bronchioles. Hit them, and they dilate, so you can get more oxygen in.
And what about metabolically?
This is the key. Epinephrine is what triggers the mass discharge of energy that Guyton talks about. It hits the liver and demands glucose via glycogenolysis, breaking down stored sugar. It hits your fat cells and demands fatty acids. It basically raises the metabolic rate of almost every cell in your body.
Wow.
Norepinephrine just can't do that to the same extent. Epinephrine is the high-octane fuel you need for an all-out sprint for your life.
So to use an analogy, norepinephrine is constrict the pipes, and epinephrine is overclock the entire machine.
That is a perfect analogy, and this right here brings us to one of the most elegant pieces of design in the entire human body, the cortex connection.
I bookmarked this section. This answers the fundamental question. Why is the medulla wrapped inside the cortex? Why aren't they just two separate glands in different parts of the body?
It's not an accident. It's all about plumbing and chemistry. It's brilliant.
Explain the plumbing, the blood flow.
The adrenal gland has a portal circulation. It's unique. Blood enters the gland from the outside, at the capsule, and it flows inwards. So it has to go through the cortex first.
It percolates through the layers.
It percolates down. So as the blood trickles through the layers of the cortex, it's picking up everything the cortex is making.
And the cortex, which we'll get to, is making steroids, specifically cortisol.
Right. So by the time that blood finally reaches the center, the medulla, it is absolutely marinating in cortisol. The concentration of cortisol in the adrenal medulla is something like 100 times higher than what you find in your general circulation.
And the medulla needs that high concentration for some reason.
It requires it. It is fundamentally dependent on it. To turn norepinephrine into epinephrine, you need a specific enzyme. It has a tongue twister of a name: phenylethanolamine and methyltransferase.
Let's just call it PNMT.
Let's call it PNMT. This enzyme is what adds the methyl group that upgrades norepinephrine to the super hormone epinephrine. And here is the kicker. The gene that makes PNMT, the synthesis of that enzyme, is induced by cortisol.
So wait a minute. Without the cortex working and producing cortisol, the medulla can't make its primary weapon.
Exactly. The slow system, the cortex, provides the essential tools for the fast system, the medulla, to function at its peak. It's a beautiful piece of integration. If you have a fetus with a rare genetic defect where they can't make cortisol, their adrenal medulla never develops properly. It's dysplastic. They can't make epinephrine.
That is integration. That's why they're roommates. It's not just a coincidence of anatomy.
It makes perfect physiological sense, too. Stress requires both systems. The cortex is effectively telling the medulla, hey, look, we're in a high-stress environment. You need to upgrade your ammunition from simple norepinephrine to full-blown epinephrine.
Now, Guyton mentions a concept he calls a safety factor, or redundancy, regarding the adrenal medulla. What's that about?
Physiology loves backups. It loves redundant systems. So think about it. We have sympathetic nerves that go directly to our blood vessels to maintain tone and pressure.
Right, the direct wiring.
The direct wiring. But what if those nerves are damaged? What if you have, say, a spinal cord injury?
Then the adrenal medulla steps in as the backup generator.
Precisely. The circulating catecholamines from the medulla are sufficient to maintain blood pressure and vascular tone, even if the direct neural wiring is cut. It ensures that even with a breakdown in the electrical system, the chemical broadcast system can keep you alive.
But only for a sprint.
Only for a sprint.
Yeah.
That's the key limitation. Epinephrine has a half-life of about 2 minutes. It's a flash in the pan. It gets you up the tree to escape the bear. But what if you have to stay up in that tree for 3 days? Or if the bear is a famine or a war or a chronic illness, epinephrine burns out. You can't run on that forever.
And for that, you need the marathon runner, the adrenal cortex.
The architecture of resilience.
Okay, let's shift our focus to that outer shell. This is the heavyweight, right? It makes up about 80 to 90% of the gland's mass. And unlike the medulla, which is neural, this is true glandular tissue.
It is. And it's beautifully structured in layers. I always encourage students to visualize it like you're diving into the earth. You've got the crust, the mantle, the core. In the adrenal cortex, we have 3 zones, and the mnemonic that everyone learns is GFR.
GFR, salt, sugar, sex.
Exactly. And that corresponds to the zona glomerulosa, the zona fasciculata, and the zona reticularis, from outside to inside.
Okay, let's walk through that geography. So the outermost layer right under the capsule.
That's the zona glomerulosa. This is the salt layer. It's pretty thin, maybe 15% of the cortex. Its one and only job is to make mineralocorticoids, the main one being aldosterone.
Got it. And moving inward from there.
The middle layer is the widest, about 75% of the cortex. This is the zona fasciculata, the sugar layer. Its cells are arranged in these long, straight cords or fascicles, which is where it gets its name. This is the main factory for glucocorticoids, primarily cortisol.
Okay, and then the deepest layer, the one that's actually touching the medulla.
That's the zona reticularis, the sex layer. It produces androgens, which are male sex hormones like DHEA and androstenedione.
Now, before we break down what these hormones actually do, I want to talk about the factory floor itself, because the biochemistry here is fascinating. Genong really emphasizes that all of these hormones, aldosterone, cortisol, androgens, they all start from the exact same raw material. Cholesterol. And there's this misconception, I think, that glands just have hormones ready to go, but they have to build them.
Yeah.
So where does the adrenal gland get its cholesterol? Does it make it from scratch?
It can from acetate, but it's inefficient. It prefers to order takeout. About 80% of the cholesterol used for steroid synthesis is imported directly from the blood.
And what for?
In the form of LDL, low-density lipoprotein.
We usually hear about LDL as the bad cholesterol that clogs your arteries.
In a cardiology context, absolutely. But in adrenal physiology, LDL is gold. The adrenal cells have these specific indentations on their surface called coated pits.
Coated pits, that sounds like a trap.
It is a trap, in a good way. These pits are lined with receptors that are specifically designed to grab the LDL particles as they float by in the blood. They pull the LDL inside the cell via endocytosis. They literally swallow it. Then they fuse it with lysosomes to break it down and free up the cholesterol inside.
So the cell grabs the raw material. Then what
It
happens?
shuttles the cholesterol into the mitochondria, and this is where the magic happens. This is the single most important step, the rate-limiting step.
The bottleneck of the whole operation.
The bottleneck. There's an enzyme inside the mitochondria called cholesterol desmolase, sometimes called P450cc. This enzyme's job is to cleave the side chain off the cholesterol molecule to turn it into a new molecule called pregnenolone.
And pregnenolone is the grandmother of all steroids.
She's the matriarch. Once you have pregnenolone, you can make anything. Aldosterone, cortisol, testosterone, estrogen, they all descend from pregnenolone.
So if you want to control the output of the entire factory, you just need to control that one enzyme, cholesterol desmolase.
Precisely. When the pituitary gland stimulates the adrenal cortex with its hormone, ACTH, what it's primarily doing is hitting the gas pedal on that specific step. It speeds up the conversion of cholesterol to pregnenolone.
And from there, as you said in the notes, it's a choose-your-own adventure.
That is the perfect way to describe it. I mean, think about it. Why does the zona glomerulosa make aldosterone while the zona fasciculata, just next door, makes cortisol? They both start with pregnenolone.
It has to be about which enzymes are in the room.
Enzyme specificity, that's it. The zona glomerulosa possesses a critical enzyme called aldosterone synthetase. The other zones do not have it. So even if the fasciculata wanted to make aldosterone, it physically cannot. It lacks the machinery.
It's like a car factory versus a truck factory. You start with the same sheet metal, but you use different stamps and tools.
Exactly right.
Okay, let's look at the products then. Let's start with the life-saving hormones, the mineral corticoids, aldosterone.
You know, physiology textbooks can be, well, a bit dry, but Guyton uses very dramatic language here. He says if you lose the mineralocorticoids, you will die within 3 days to 2 weeks.
That is incredibly stark. Why? What is so absolutely essential about this hormone?
It's about the ocean within us. We're basically bags of salty water, right? We carry an internal ocean of salty fluid. Aldosterone is the guardian of that salinity.
So what's the mechanism of action?
Aldosterone targets the kidneys. Specifically, it goes to the principal cells of the collecting tubules, and its message is very, very simple. Save sodium, dump potassium.
Okay, save sodium. How?
It's a steroid, so it acts on the DNA of the kidney cells. It tells them to make more sodium pumps, the Na plus K plus ATPase, and more sodium channels. It basically builds more doors and pumps to pull sodium out of the urine and put it back into the blood.
And the golden rule of physiology is, where salt goes, water follows.
Exactly. So by reclaiming salt, you reclaim water. This keeps your extracellular fluid volume up. It keeps your blood pressure stable. Without aldosterone, you just pee out all your sodium, your blood volume collapses, you go into circulatory shock, and you die.
And at the same time, you mentioned it dumps potassium?
This is equally critical. It's an exchange. If you're going to save a positive ion, sodium, you have to get rid of another positive ion to maintain electrical balance. That something is potassium. Aldosterone pumps potassium out of the blood and into the urine.
And if that system fails?
Potassium builds up in the blood, hyperkalemia, and potassium is the key ion that sets the electrical potential of all your nerve and muscle cells, especially your heart. If it gets too high, it paralyzes the heart. You die of cardiac toxicity.
So aldosterone is the bouncer. Sodium stays in the club, potassium gets kicked out.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Now here's a nuance that I think is crucial for anyone studying this. We talked about ACTH from the pituitary being the boss of the adrenal gland. But looking at the control systems, ACTH doesn't seem to be the main driver for aldosterone.
You are exactly right. This is a very common point of confusion on exams. The zona glomerulosa, the salt layer, is largely independent of the pituitary. It pretty much ignores ACTH for the most part.
So who is driving the salt layer then?
Two main things: potassium concentrations in the blood and a hormone called angiotensin II.
Which makes perfect sense when you think about it.
It's a beautiful, direct feedback loop. If potassium levels in your blood start to rise, even a tiny bit, the zona glomerulosa cells can literally taste that potassium directly, and they respond by secreting aldosterone to flush it out. No middleman needed.
And angiotensin II.
Angiotensin II is the body's main signal for low blood pressure or low blood volume. So if you're bleeding or you're severely dehydrated, angiotensin II levels go up, that triggers aldosterone release, and that helps you hold on to salt and water to repressurize the whole system.
So what does ACTH do for aldosterone, if anything?
It plays what we call a permissive role. It keeps the lights on in the factory, it keeps the machinery maintained, but it doesn't control the volume of production. That's up to potassium and angiotensin.
Okay. Now, speaking of bouncers and receptors, we have to talk about the licorice mystery. This was one of my favorite parts of the reading prep.
It's a classic clinical story, and it highlights a massive, massive problem in receptor biology.
The problem of identity, or mistaken identity.
Mistaken identity, exactly. Cortisol and aldosterone are chemically very similar. They're cousins. And it turns out the mineralocorticoid receptor, the chair that aldosterone is supposed to sit in, actually loves cortisol. It binds cortisol with just as high affinity.
And the problem is one of quantity, right?
It's a huge problem of quantity. In your blood right now, you have about 2,000 times more circulating cortisol than you do aldosterone.
So if we imagine a concert, it's like you have 2,000 cortisol fans and only one aldosterone fan, all trying to get into the same front row seat.
Exactly. By sheer probability, the receptor should be completely swamped by cortisol all the time. We should all be walking around with massive salt retention and sky-high blood pressure because cortisol is constantly hijacking the aldosterone system.
But we aren't. So why?
Because of the bodyguard.
The bodyguard enzyme.
It has a terrible name, 11-beta-hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase type 2. Let's just stick with 11-beta-HSD2.
The bodyguard works for me.
This enzyme sits inside the kidney cells, right next to the mineralocorticoid receptor. Its sole job is to watch the door. When a molecule of cortisol approaches, the enzyme grabs it and chemically neutralizes it. It converts cortisol into cortisone.
Cortisone with an N.
Yes. And here's the key. Cortisone cannot bind to the receptor. It's inert in this context. So the enzyme effectively disarms the massive army of cortisol molecules just before they can sit in the chair.
Which leaves the chair empty for the one tiny aldosterone fan to come along and find its spot.
Exactly. It creates what you could call a cortisol-free zone right around the receptor so that aldosterone can do its job without any interference.
That is just so elegant. So where does the licorice come in?
Real black licorice, not the red candy, but the stuff made from the licorice root, contains a compound called glyceric acid.
And what does that acid do?
It inhibits the bodyguard enzyme. It knocks out 11-beta-HSD2.
It assassinates the bouncer.
It does. So if you eat a large amount of real licorice, you disable that protection. Suddenly, that ocean of cortisol floods the receptor. The kidney has no defense. It thinks, oh my God, look at all this aldosterone.
But it's not aldosterone.
It's cortisol masquerading as aldosterone. So you start retaining massive amounts of salt and water. You dump all your potassium. Your blood pressure skyrockets. It's a condition we call apparent mineralic corticoid excess.
Apparent? Because your actual aldosterone levels are probably rock bottom.
They're probably zero. The body is desperately trying to shut down real aldosterone production to lower the blood pressure, but it doesn't matter because cortisol is driving the car.
Lesson learned. Physiology is all about context. The same hormone can be a hero or a villain, depending on the enzymes protecting the receptor.
Precisely.
All right, let's move to the heavyweight champion of stress, the sugar layer, the glucocorticoids. Cortisol.
A stress archetype.
We call them glucocorticoids because, historically, they were discovered for their ability to raise blood glucose. But reading the list of functions in Ganong and Guyton, sugar feels like a massive understatement. This hormone seems to control almost everything.
It really does. But if you want to understand cortisol, you have to understand its mission. Its mission is to help the animal cope with the long haul.
The marathon.
The marathon. Stress, whether it's physical trauma, a bad infection, or starvation, is metabolically expensive. It consumes huge amounts of energy. Cortisol's job is supply chain management for a crisis.
Okay, so what is its strategy?
The strategy is ruthless prioritization. The brain must survive, period. And the brain's primary fuel is glucose. So, to ensure the brain has fuel, cortisol initiates a total metabolic reorganization. First, it stimulates gluconeogenesis in the liver. It tells the liver to start baking fresh glucose from non-carbohydrate sources.
But you need ingredients to bake.
And this is the ruthless part. Where does the liver get the ingredients? Cortisol goes to your muscles, and it doesn't just inhibit protein synthesis. It actively triggers protein catabolism. It starts breaking down your muscle tissue to release amino acids into the blood.
So it's tearing down the walls of the house to burn the wood in the fireplace.
That is the perfect metaphor. It also goes to your adipose tissue and mobilizes fats. It wants the bloodstream to be full of amino acids and fatty acids, so the liver has all the ingredients it needs to make glucose for the brain.
And it even blocks other tissues from using that glucose, right? The so-called anti-insulin effect.
Yes. It decreases glucose utilization in most other cells. It effectively tells the muscles and the fat cells, you don't get to eat sugar today. The brain gets all of it.
This explains the very distinctive physical appearance of people with chronic high cortisol, like in Cushing's syndrome.
Exactly. If you never turn that stress response off, you never stop tearing down the house, you see muscle wasting, which is why they have thin arms and legs. You see thin skin because the collagen protein is being broken down. You see osteoporosis because the bone matrix itself is being dissolved for its amino acids.
But in an acute crisis, say a broken leg or a severe infection, this is a brilliant life-saving strategy.
It is absolutely essential. There's a classic experiment mentioned in Guyton where they inflicted a bone fracture on animals. Within minutes, their cortisol levels jumped 6-fold.
Why? What's the immediate benefit there?
Part of it is mobilizing fuel for the immune response and for repair. But another huge part is something we call permissive action.
This term kept popping up in the reading. Permissive.
Think of cortisol as the stage manager of the stress response. It doesn't sing the main song, but it builds the stage, it turns on the lights, and it makes sure the microphone works.
And who's the singer in this case?
The singer is the vascular system and the catecholamines we talked about earlier, epinephrine and norepinephrine.
Explain that connection.
Okay, so epinephrine constricts blood vessels to keep your blood pressure up during a crisis. But it turns out epinephrine cannot do that job effectively unless cortisol is present. Cortisol maintains the responsiveness of the vascular smooth muscle to the catecholamines. It upregulates the alpha receptors.
So without cortisol, the fast system just fails.
It completely collapses. This is critical. If you are adrenal insufficient, if you have no cortisol, you can go into shock from even minor stresses. You can pump a patient in the ICU full of pressor drugs like norepinephrine, but if they lack cortisol, their blood pressure won't budge. You have to give them steroids to permit the pressors to work.
That is the definition of integration. The slow system is required to enable the fast system.
Yes, it's a beautiful partnership.
Okay, let's look at the control tower for cortisol. We know aldosterone kind of does its own thing with potassium in the kidney, but cortisol seems to be strictly controlled from the top down.
Absolutely, the HPA axis, hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal.
Walk us through that chain of command.
It all starts in the brain. The hypothalamus, which is like the command center, releases a hormone called CRH, or corticotropin-releasing hormone. This travels a very short distance through a special portal system of blood vessels to the anterior pituitary gland, which sits right below it.
And the pituitary, in response, releases ACTH.
Adrenocorticotropic hormone. ACTH then enters the general circulation, travels all over the body, finds the adrenal cortex, binds to its specific receptors on the cells there, and as we said, hits the on switch for that rate-limiting enzyme, cholesterol desmolase.
And then the system has brakes, I assume.
Of course, a classic negative feedback loop. As cortisol levels rise in the blood, that cortisol travels back up to both the pituitary and the hypothalamus and says, okay, we have enough, stop shouting at the adrenal gland. It inhibits its own production at two different levels.
But even without stress, it's not a flat line, is it? We have this daily rhythm.
The circadian rhythm. This is one of the most beautiful aspects of endocrinology. Cortisol follows the sun, more or less.
How so?
Your cortisol levels are lowest around midnight, when you should be asleep. Then, while you're sleeping, in the early hours of the morning, the secretory bursts of ACTH and cortisol become more frequent and larger. It peaks about 1 hour after you wake up.
The cortisol awakening response.
That's it. It's the body revving its engine before the race starts. It's mobilizing a bit of sugar for energy. It's tightening up the blood vessels to help you fight gravity so you don't get dizzy when you stand up. It's preparing you metabolically for the activity of the day ahead.
But a major stress can override this whole rhythm.
Instantly. If your amygdala detects a threat, or if pain signals hit your brainstem, the hypothalamus basically says, forget the clock. It dumps CRH. The system always prioritizes immediate survival over the daily schedule.
I want to touch on a technical point from the outline. The difference between genomic and non-genomic effects. Usually, we think of steroids as acting really slowly, right?
That is the classic dogma. Steroids are lipids, so they can cross the cell membrane easily. They find a receptor in the cytoplasm. The whole complex floats into the nucleus, binds to DNA, and stimulates the synthesis of new proteins. That takes time. 45 minutes, an hour, sometimes days.
That's the slow resilience part.
Exactly. But clinicians and researchers started noticing something odd. If you give a patient a huge intravenous dose of steroids, sometimes you see cardiovascular effects in minutes.
Well,
Way too fast to be explained by making new proteins.
so they have a shortcut.
It appears so. Guyton mentions that aldosterone can increase CAMP and smooth muscle cells in less than 2 minutes. This strongly suggests that there are likely membrane receptors sitting on the outside of the cell that can trigger rapid second messenger pathways, just like the fast peptide hormones do.
So the slow system actually has a few fast tricks up its sleeve.
It does. Which, it just blurs the line between the two systems even more. It's all one integrated response.
Okay, we've built the machine, we've looked at the wiring and the control systems. Now, often the best way to understand an engine is to see what happens when it blows a gasket. Let's talk pathology.
The clinical stakes. This is where it gets real.
Let's start with failure. Not enough hormone. Hypoadrenalism. Addison's disease.
Named after Thomas Addison, who first described it. This is typically an autoimmune destruction of the adrenal cortex. For some reason, the body's own immune system attacks and destroys the gland.
So you lose everything. No salt, no sugar, no sex hormones from the adrenal.
The loss of aldosterone gives you that electrolyte crisis we discussed. Low sodium, high potassium, dehydration, low blood pressure. The loss of cortisol gives you what's known as an Addisonian crisis.
What does that look like in a patient?
It looks like extreme fragility. A person with Addison's cannot buffer stress. A healthy person gets the flu. They feel crummy for a few days. Their cortisol shoots up, and they get through it. An Addison's patient gets the flu, and because they can't mobilize glucose to feed their immune cells or maintain their vascular tone, they go into total circulatory collapse. It is often fatal if it's not recognized and treated with high-dose steroids immediately.
And there's a very specific visual sign for Addison's, too. The tan.
Hyperpigmentation. This is a board exam classic for a reason.
So why does adrenal failure make your skin dark? It seems unrelated.
It goes back to that negative feedback loop we talked about. Think about it. The adrenal gland is broken. Cortisol is at 0. So the pituitary gland isn't getting any stop signal.
So the pituitary just screams louder and louder.
It screams at the top of its lungs. It pumps out massive, massive amounts of ACTH. Now here's the biochemistry nuance. ACTH is actually cut from a much larger precursor protein called POMC pro-opiomelanocortin.
That's a mouthful.
It is. But POMC is a multi-tool. It contains the sequence for ACTH, but it also contains the sequence for other hormones, including MSH melanocyte-stimulating hormone. When the pituitary is working overtime trying to make ACTH, you get a kind of spillover effect. You produce these MSH-like fragments that stimulate the melanocytes in the skin to produce melanin.
So the tan is literally a side effect of the pituitary screaming at a deaf adrenal gland.
Precisely. You see it most prominently in sun-exposed areas, but also in the creases of the hands, on the gums, inside the cheeks, on old scars.
Wow. Now let's flip the coin. Too much cortisol. Hyperadrenalism. Cushing's.
The melting disease, as it's sometimes called.
I can't get that image out of my head. Melting.
It's visceral, but it's disturbingly accurate. Remember the ruthless logic of cortisol? Break down protein, mobilize fat. In Cushing's, that switch is stuck in the on position 2004-7.
So you see severe muscle wasting.
You see stick-thin arms and legs because the muscle is being cannibalized for fuel. But then the fat redistribution is just bizarre. You get central obesity, a lot of fat in the belly, and these specific deposits like the moon face and the buffalo hump on the back of the neck.
Why the back of the neck? Do we know?
We actually don't fully understand why the fat chooses those specific depots, but it's so characteristic it's diagnostic. And the skin becomes paper thin. You get these wide purple stray stretch marks on the abdomen because the underlying collagen matrix has literally snapped under the strain.
And the bonus.
Severe osteoporosis. The protein structure of the bone is being dissolved. It is a state of accelerated, unrelenting catabolism. The body is consuming itself.
Now, just to clarify for the listeners, can you distinguish between Cushing's syndrome and Cushing's disease?
It's a very important distinction. Cushing's syndrome is the big umbrella term. It just means you have high cortisol. The cause could be anything. It could be a tumor on the adrenal gland itself, or most commonly, it could be iatrogenic, meaning it's because a doctor is giving you high-dose prednisone for your asthma or autoimmune disease.
Okay. And the disease?
Cushing's disease is specific. It means you have a tumor in the pituitary gland that is secreting too much ACTH, and that is what's driving the adrenals to overproduce cortisol. So it's a pituitary problem causing an adrenal problem.
Got it. One last pathology. Adrenogenital syndrome. This brings us right back to that assembly line logic.
The plumbing problem. It's a perfect illustration of the biochemistry.
We said earlier that everything starts as cholesterol, then becomes pregnant alone, and then it flows down these different enzymatic pipes to become salt, sugar, or sex hormones.
Right. Now imagine you have a genetic defect that causes a blockage in the main pipe leading to cortisol and aldosterone. The most common one is a deficiency in an enzyme called 21-hydroxylase.
So the factory can't make cortisol.
It can't. So what does the pituitary do? It screams, make more cortisol, and sends down tons of ACTH. The factory revs up and makes huge amounts of pregnenolone, but the pipe to cortisol is blocked. The pipe to aldosterone is often blocked too.
So where does all that precursor flow go?
It has nowhere else to go. It spills over into the only open pipe, the androgen pathway, the sex layer.
So the adrenal gland, trying to make cortisol, accidentally starts pumping out massive amounts of testosterone-like hormones instead.
Exactly. In a female fetus, this can cause masculinization of the external genitalia. In a male child, it can trigger precocious puberty. You might see a 5-year-old boy with a beard and adult musculature. It's a dramatic example of what happens when the assembly line gets rerouted.
It really brings home the complexity. It's not just make hormone A, it's balance the flow of precursors across 3 different enzymatic pathways while constantly listening to signals from the brain and the kidney.
It's a symphony, and if one instrument is out of tune, the whole song changes completely.
So bringing it all back together, we have the 2-speed system.
Fast crisis, the medulla. The neural outpost. It burns hot and it burns fast. It saves you from the tiger that is right now in front of you.
And slow resilience, the cortex, the endocrine factory. It works over hours and days to fuel the brain, maintain the pressure, and ultimately repair the damage from the crisis.
And we have to remember the trade-off. Physiology is always about trade-offs.
What's the fundamental trade-off here?
The trade-off is structure versus survival. Cortisol keeps you alive today by borrowing from your body's long-term structure. It breaks down your bone and your muscle to get fuel. It operates on the assumption that the stress is temporary. It assumes the tiger will eventually leave and you'll have time to rebuild.
But we don't live in a world of tigers anymore. We live in a world of 30-year mortgages and 24-hour news cycles and constant traffic jams.
Chronic psychological stress.
Exactly. So if we are constantly activating this system, if we are constantly pouring out cortisol, we're just constantly borrowing from our structural future to pay for a fight that we aren't even physically fighting.
We are melting our bones to pay for a deadline. We are thinning our skin to worry about an email.
That is a terrifying thought, but also an incredibly clarifying one.
It really brings up the question of evolutionary mismatch. We are running Paleolithic software in a completely modern world. Our adrenal glands are exquisitely designed for acute physical crisis, not for chronic psychological worry.
And that's something to chew on. Adaptation is a layered strategy, but sometimes the strategy no longer fits the environment.
Indeed. It's a profound challenge.
If you want to see the diagrams we talked about, and you really should see the chemical structures to really get that assembly line concept, check out the chapters on the adrenal gland and Ganong and Ngaitan.
The visual of the coated pits pulling in the LDL alone is worth the look. It's really cool.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. We'll see you on the next one.
Stay curious.